Alrighty. If you are not following the Heterodox STEM Substack, I do actually very much recommend it. There's some interesting takes in there all the time. And you can certainly find, well, some interesting things to read. Sometimes you agree, sometimes you disagree, and it's nature of things, and I actually quite appreciate that. This is one that caught my eye, and it's brief. It's a nice and brief article, so I think I will get into it a little bit with this, but it actually goes through one of the articles that Deb Philman and I reviewed on the last SciChat Saturday. And it comes from this Just Physics thing, and that is run by the American Association of Physics Teachers, which we'll get into that in a moment. But Alex Small here was one of the authors of that critique of the Observing Whiteness article that Physical Review Physics Education Research ran last year, which was roundly and I think rightly mocked at that point, because it was not a work of science. Let's put it that way. It was not a work of any amount of science or scholarship involved in that, I don't think. But let us start with this. So, and he makes a couple of points that I just want to emphasize for folks here. Physics education journals are known for their eclectic mix of articles. Some papers are exactly what you'd expect in a good education journal. Statistical studies of student performance in response to different teaching techniques. Such studies can be done well or poorly, like any other type of study, but it's entirely reasonable that education journals put these studies out there for further consideration. Other articles are less about teaching practices and more about understanding already known physics phenomenon from a unique perspective. Such articles run in education journals in the hope that they will be useful for teachers seeking new insights and appropriate reading materials for students. For my own part, as a university professor who tries to keep some research going, I often read such articles for my own benefit, to supplement the research literature when I want to learn something that I haven't explored much before. Now, I'm going to make a momentary pause there just to remind folks that I've highlighted a lot of lousy articles, and so too have we highlighted a lot of lousy articles on the Rogue Journal Club. That is not to say it is true of all of them, and I want to emphasize that for folks listening here. You can find some very good, very well done studies, and you can still find them in social science journals. So don't come away with the impression that everything is terrible. That is not a true statement. But there are certainly some terrible studies, not all of them. The Physics Teacher, published by the American Association of Physics Teachers, is an overall good journal, mostly emphasizing the second category of articles, many of which I find useful. Of course, we physicists are as human as anyone else, and hence prone to the same fads as anyone else. In the wake of America's 2020 racial reckoning, the Physics Teacher launched a column called Just Physics. If that rings a bell, you know where from, focused on social justice issues in physics. These articles, alas, have not delivered the same degree of insight as the other articles. Consider the most recent Just Physics article titled, quote, Identifying and Addressing Roadblocks to Justice in Physics Education. That was actually the name of the article that Deb and I reviewed on the last SciChat Saturday. Much of the article is focused on the punitive anti-blackness of the physics community. The most perceptive point made is also one of the earliest. Quote, Years of effort, ostensibly well-meaning, and mountains of peer-reviewed publications in physics education research have failed to produce material change in the conditions that black students, staff, and faculty encounter in physics curricula, programs, departments, and workplaces, as known anecdotally and noted in various studies. Okay, end quote. It is certainly true that years of discussion have not done much to change educational outcomes for the better. Now, I want to pause and remind folks with that less than 1/4 of high school seniors, according to the last senior survey of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, otherwise known as the Nation Report Card, less than 1/4 of high school seniors are proficient in science. Less than 1/4 are proficient in math. Just as a reminder, that has been that way for a while. Whether that's due to a failure to change curricula and the conditions in academic programs and scientific workplaces, or other factors, I will freely concede that years of equity discussion have changed little. Alas, the remainder of the article does little to clarify what further changes can or should be implemented. The next paragraph laments the rigidity of the physics curricula. I will be the first to argue that certain aspects of physics curricula should be reconsidered. For instance, I think the classic block on inclined plane mechanics problems are less important than motion in viscous fluids at low Reynolds number, conditions relevant to much of biology and chemistry. This is actually a good point. And in a lot of universities, you will find sometimes physics or even chemistry or some other general ed things. You will find some cases where courses are offered in basic physics that are tailored toward folks going into a specific major to get around that. And so I can understand that. That is actually that's a very, very fair critique in that for some folks going into a particular field, certain experiments in learning certain aspects of physics are more important than others. That is not to say one shouldn't have a basic understanding of physics, be proficient in physics, but it is more so that there are certain things in physics that are more relevant for specific majors than others, and similar kinds of things for other disciplines. I'm quite aware that most colleagues disagree with me on this, and I wish the physics community would consider changes along these lines. However, our profession's unanimous focus on timeless foundational material, Newtonian mechanics, electromagnetism, waves, heat, relativity, and the basics of quantum mechanics is not a bad thing. No, indeed, it is not. Even my suggestion above is ultimately merely a shift in emphasis within a canon of established principles that have wide applicability throughout many areas of science and engineering. Many of these fundamentals is a non-negotiable prerequisite for advanced work in the field. Yeah. For many, many, many fields, actually. What would the just physics author substitute for these fundamentals? It's hard to say for sure. The most concrete point offered in the article is this, and I will, before I read what he said, the point in this is that I remember reading that Just Physics article with Deb, and I thought about it after the fact, and we didn't really get into it, that they actually offered nothing in terms of an actual improvement that would actually make a difference. But anyway, the most concrete, and this was the most concrete point they offered, the most concrete point offered is this. Quote, in order to become more relevant to a changing social sensibility concerning broader issues in the world, such as the climate crisis, rampant racism, white backlash, rage, and neocolonialism, oh boy, physics curricula must shift their foci, methods, and content to become relevant and applicable to how physics is practiced today. But more than that, we have an opportunity to inform what guides research priorities and technological developments in the future by centering justice issues within the physics curriculum. End quote. Question, how is that going to help anybody actually master physics? I'll wait. As far as I can tell, the author is suggesting we spend more time in the physics class discussing social issues. I submit that this approach would, 1, hurt students with weak prior preparation as they need even more focus on fundamentals, and 2, shift the social dynamics of the classroom in ways that would only amplify the value of social capital, such as having attended an elite private school. Again, how does this focus... right here, how does the focus on this thing actually make a difference with respect to mastery for students? Correct answer, it doesn't. There's no study that I know that shows that, and likely no study that will. The author raises, and again, that's my particular opinion, but we'll go from there. The author also raises objections against the close association between the physics profession and the military. Matters of war and peace are tremendously complex, and I know good, thoughtful physicists with virtually every conceivable stance on what the relationship between physics and the military ought to be. Whether your perspective is patriotism or pacifism, we should all agree that physics education should not be about left-right politics. And if we focus on racial equity for African Americans, I will note that African Americans have a range of opinions on matters of military and foreign policy. People aren't monoliths. You're not monoliths by your demographic characteristics. This is the one thing that they forget when they're writing these things from a social justice perspective. They're so focused on groups. Forget something kind of important. In my interactions with various industries that employ physicists, military contractors seem to frankly outperform other sectors in racial diversity. The connection between military research and lack of racial diversity in physics is a giant, quote, citation needed, end quote, point. I wish I could say this article provided some sort of insight that might help us better prepare more students from more backgrounds. Instead, it just provided clickbait fodder for commentary, a dynamic in which I now participate with full self awareness. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're aware of that, Alex. This is something we're all talking about in commentary. But yeah, this is, I bring this up as an example. It's something I've noticed in that there's all sorts of selections like these. Well, we should bring more social justice things into the curriculum. There's a problem with that, in that it probably doesn't actually address any of the things that are to help the students learn anything. There's not a whole lot of there's not really any studies that I know of that show that that kind of approach actually helps students achieve mastery. And if the education report card over time is any indication, since these kinds of things have been implemented over time in some schools and K through 12 and what have you, it hasn't made a damn lick of difference to do that. That's not the way to fix things, though. There certainly needs to be a fix to it. Anyway, short video today, but let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.